Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Thanks so much for joining us here today on our Facebook page for our Facebook Live. Today's another study hall, or I should say, today is our first study hall after 3 consecutive trivias. So I know we've been promising you a study hall now for quite some time, but I have Noelle Hale with me here today, and she's going to lead you through a tasting of a couple of wines and give you some pointers and tips on some wines that are often overlooked when you're studying for your WSET level 3 or even diploma for that matter, or level 2. So great to have you here, Noelle. Thanks so much for being here. And in case, for those of you who have not met Noelle before or seen Noelle before on our Facebook Live broadcast, Noelle is our diploma manager. So she runs the entire administrative and student support side of our diploma program. So it is a great honor to have you joining us here today, Noelle. So what you got for us?
Thanks, Christian. We are going to talk about 3 wines from Australia today. We've got a Hunter Valley Semillon, a Barossa Shiraz, and a fortified Muscat. So.
All right, great. I'll switch the screen over here to give you control and let you take it away.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, so here we go, guys. This is a little map of kind of southeastern Australia here. And so just to orient ourselves a little bit, if you look kind of, midway up on the right, you can see Sydney. And so the first wine we're going to talk about is a Semillon from the Hunter Valley. And so that is located, if you kind of go due north of Sydney, you can maybe see the Hunter Valley up there. And then the next wine we're going to talk about is a Shiraz from the Barossa. And maybe you've heard of Barossa Shiraz before. But if we swing over to the other kind of end of the map here, if you see Adelaide and then go a little bit north of Adelaide, that is where the Barossa Valley is. And then the last wine that we're going to talk about is a fortified Muscat. And this is kind of, not a wine that gets talked a lot about, but Australia's wine industry was actually founded by a lot of doctors, and a lot of them, started making fortified Muscats back a couple hundred years ago to prescribe to their patients as medicine, believe it or not. And so it's one of the oldest wine styles in Australia, but it's not very common to talk about today. And so the most famous region for fortified Muscat in Australia is Rutherglen. And so if you look in the middle near the bottom of the map near Melbourne, and then kind of go a little bit northeast of that, that's where Rutherglen is. And so Rutherglen is where most of the fortified Muscat kind of still made in Australia comes from. It's probably the most famous region for it. I unfortunately couldn't find a Rutherglen Muscat, but I did find one made by a winery named Yalumba. They're actually located over in the Barossa near where we're going to talk about our Shiraz here in a minute. But it's in a very similar style to Rutherglen Muscat. And so I just think they're such neat wines that I really wanted to talk about them a little bit. So up first here, I have the 2019 Tyrrell's Hunter Valley Semillon. So I got a glass of it. Maybe you guys can see. Maybe. There we go. There we go. And so you can see it's a really pale color. And, oh, thanks. And so the Hunter Valley region is kind of interesting because it's really warm and humid. And this is surprising to people sometimes when they taste these wines because they are really, really high in acid. And so you try this wine and you think, oh my gosh, this has got to be, grown in a cool climate somewhere because it's just so high acid and it's so mouthwatering. But the really interesting thing is the Semillon wines in the Hunter Valley are made in a very unique and distinctive way. So because it's actually really hot and humid there, they have a lot of disease pressure. So the grapes actually get picked really early, meaning that the wines, don't have lots and lots of sugar in them by the time they're picked. And they pick them, early to avoid, any kind of like rain or humidity that's going to cause problems later in the year. And so what that means is that the alcohol on Hunter Valley Semillon is always really low. And so you're looking at 10 to 11% alcohol in the finished wines. And then the wines are always, well, I should say almost always, because there's always a weird exception with wine, right? But almost without exception, the wines are fermented in stainless steel and bottled really early. And so again, I'll show you here. It's a really pale color wine, right? Oh, thank you. And so if I am, holding the glass at a 45-degree angle here and looking at it, it's so pale that it's almost, watery, right? And then when I smell the wine, I get some kind of green apple, some citrus, maybe a little bit of dough, maybe. I think this wine may see some lees contact. And so Hunter Valley Semillon, when it's young, can be a little bit hard to figure out what it is if you get it on a blind tasting exam. And so, if you're trying to think through, okay, well, how am I supposed to hone in on it, right? You're looking for that low alcohol. And the really interesting thing about it is that with age, it develops this toasty flavor. And so if you get an older Hunter Valley Semillon on an exam, again, you're looking for that high alcohol, and it may almost taste like it's been aged in oak, which it blows your mind the first time you have one, because they really are not. And so that's another thing you can look for. And so just to recap, we've got the high acid. We've got the low alcohol, only 10 to 11%. And then, with time, they develop a really interesting toasty note, not from oak, and this kind of like beeswaxy sort of flavor. It's really interesting. So anyway, I'll go ahead and try it real quick. Yep, and I can confirm it is pretty high acid. So, yeah, and this is a young wine. It's only the 2019 vintage, so not really any of those like toasty flavors quite developing just yet. I do get maybe a little bit of a doughy note from some lees contact, but yeah, for now, just that kind of green apple and citrus, really high acid. But yeah, this is a wine where if you lay it down for a few years, it's actually going to get more interesting. So kind of cool. Okay, so let's go on to our second wine here. This is one that maybe, a few more people have maybe heard of, right? Barossa Shiraz. And, so we're over in this region here where it's got really long, sunlight hours. I'll show you guys this wine. There it is. Yeah, and you can see, there we go. It's pretty dark in color, right? And so that's definitely something you can look for. When smelling this real quick. Yeah, oh man, I get beautiful, like really dark, rich fruit. Yeah, black cherry and blueberry, blackberry, yeah, really dark fruits. And if I go ahead and try it. Yeah, definitely confirm those dark fruits on the palate. Really delicious. Definitely has higher alcohol, so that's something you can keep in mind. And the tannins, I would call the tannins on this maybe like medium plus, but they're very ripe, right? There's no like chalky green unripe tannins here, right? Everything is really ripe and just delicious and beautiful. And so one thing, to note about Barossa Shiraz is it used to be very distinct for being aged in American oak. And if you've ever heard the term, like, a wine is a fruit bomb, right? The Barossa Shiraz was kind of the definition of that, just like tons of oak, tons of really extracted heavy flavors. And I think in general, the wines are being made in a little bit more of a restrained kind of style now. This wine, for example, was actually aged in French oak for 20 months. I think 15% of it was new. And so it still has that beautiful, ripe, fruit character, but it's not, it's not like this crazy huge wine anymore, even though it still is, full bodied and very and fruit forward. So if you're trying to figure out, you get a wine like this, it's a full-bodied red wine. You're running through your head, what could this be when you get it blind? Things that you can pretty easily confuse Barossa Shiraz for. Chateauneuf de Pape, right? That can be another pretty high alcohol red wine. Usually not quite as dark in color, I would say, as Barossa Shiraz. Because a lot of Chateauneuf de Pape, has those other grape varieties in it, like Grenache, that can be a little bit lighter. The other thing I personally have mixed up Barossa Shiraz with before is Napa Cabernet. And most of the time in Napa Cabernet, what you're gonna be able to distinguish, hopefully, is that in the Cabernet you're gonna have higher tannins, because Cabernet has those really thick skins that give it all that like tannic grip, even in Napa. So, and Cabernet may have higher acid as well. So yeah, really delicious stuff. And so then the third wine we're going to go through real quick here, let me get to my last slide, is our fortified Muscat. And so this is, again, like I said earlier, an interesting style of wine, one of the really earliest styles of wine made in Australia. And if you guys look here, there we go. You can see again, there we go. This is a really dark color wine. It is brown. And so, it's made from what in Australia they call brown muscat. And it's a really delicious dessert wine. So yeah, definitely brown in color. Oh my gosh. And it's jumping out of the glass. I can, start smelling some of these aromas when the glass is all the way back here. And so I get, really beautiful caramel, like roasted nuts, figs, different of those like roasted, toasty kind of flavors. Yeah, it smells really good. Some chocolate, maybe coffee. And so trying this, it is both lusciously sweet and pretty high in alcohol. So, which again makes sense, right? Because we're dealing with a fortified wine. So the grapes come in really, really full of sugar. They start to kind of dry on the vine. They come in, get a few, degrees of alcohol going in their fermentation, and then they're fortified with this neutral grape spirit. And so usually they're fortified up to around 17.5% alcohol. So again, that's that kind of like, heady feeling when you take a sip of one of these wines. And really, it's got a long finish. I can still taste it. Really delicious. And so if you get, a brown wine on a blind tasting exam, maybe you're, doing, D5 in the diploma where it's all about fortified wines. Sometimes we're not as comfortable, at least in the US, with fortified wine styles. And so you're trying to figure out, oh my gosh, what is this wine? A couple things maybe you could mix up, these like Australian fortified muscats or Rutherglen muscats with. It's really easy to mix them up with Pedro Jimenez sherry. I have done this myself. I think I actually mixed them up on my D5 exam in the diploma. And the other thing is the Malmsey Madeira. And, so Madeira, if you, have studied your theory, is pretty easy to discount because you're always looking for that really, really racy acidity that you get in Madeira. You'll know it's a Madeira because you take a sip and then you get hit with this acid that just about takes your head off, right? So very distinctive. As far as telling it apart from Pedro Jimenez is going to have a little bit higher of an alcohol level, and so it comes across more as like the high, level of alcohol for fortified wines versus most Rutherglen Muscat. It's going to be in that medium fortified alcohol level. And the other kind of interesting thing you can look for is Rutherglen Muscat can have kind of a green rim to it. If you put the glass down and you're looking at it, it's a little bit distinctive. I'm not sure if I can quite show it here. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to work, but just a very slight green tint to the rim when you tilt the glass. And so, those kinds of things, can hopefully help you figure it out. I've also heard it said that the roasted flavors come out more strongly in rather Glen Muscat versus dried flavors, or maybe what you get more in Pedro Jimenez. And so it's kind of blind tasting. Your mileage may vary a little bit, but yeah, all three really delicious wines. So
Great.
that's all I got,
Those are
Christian.
yeah. Let me. I think I'm unmuted. Um, so fantastic, because I think a lot of people don't try. First of all, Hunter Valley Semillon, right? And remind us again what the laterals, or what is often mixed up with Hunter Valley
Oh, thank you.
Semillon.
Yeah, I skipped that, didn't I? Good call. So, yeah, let me get my little slide back up there. That's an excellent question. So, because in its youth, Hunter Valley Semillon can be so neutral, it's really easy to mix it up with a lot of Northern Italian white wines, and they can be kind of hard to tell apart. Unfortunately, even on the best of days. Um, the other things I've seen or heard or done myself as far as mixing it up with things, it can almost come across as like a young Riesling, or even like a young Chenin Blanc, because you're looking for these grapes that in their youth at least are pretty high acid and then kind of neutral. um, I think again the really key thing here is to be able to recognize when you get a wine that's that low alcohol, because that is really the hallmark that can help you hone in. Hey, this is a little bit different here than what I normally find. In a Pinot Grigio or a Agave, or some kind of young dry Riesling. When Hunter Valley Semillon gets a little bit of age on it. You could almost mix it up with, like an aged Sauvignon, which is a Chenin Blanc from the Loire that quite often, can age a very long time and can be a really high quality wine. But again, with Hunter Valley Semillon, you're looking for that low alcohol level. And then the other thing, Sauvignons usually a little bit more like oxidatively aged. And so you would ideally find those oxidative notes of like bruised yellow apple, and things like that, versus Hunter Valley Semillon. Again, it's this kind of like weird toasty note. And I've probably mixed up Hunter Valley Semillon with other wines more than I've gotten it right. But when I have gotten it right, you notice it's this like toasty feeling that doesn't quite feel like oak. You know what I mean? And so in your head, you're like, wait, where is that? What is that? Where is that coming from? And it's like, yeah, very pure toast, not really like vanilla or spice or anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
is what I've noticed in the past.
Well,
So
that's great. Great. Thanks so much for that insight. And absolutely, I would recommend people go out and try Hunter Valley Semillon again, because most often it's forgotten about. It's one of the most iconic
yeah,
wines from Australia.
yeah, buy
And
a
then
bottle and then forget about it for a few years.
exactly, yes. If you're patient enough to forget about it for a couple of years. And then absolutely, the Rutherglen Muscats are not to be missed. And like you said, you confused it. I confused it on my exam with a PX sherry. So very
Yeah,
easy to do. So these are oftentimes wines that are can be very deceiving, right? And have some similarities with other more maybe common wines. Well,
yeah,
appreciate your time today, Noel,
no
and
problem.
hopefully all our viewers got some tips and tricks, and are encouraged to go out and try these wines. If you have any questions, you can drop those into the comment section, and if we don't answer them live, we'll answer them after the show too. There is one comment from Dean, and maybe you can answer this. You mentioned fruit bomb when you mentioned the Shiraz, and he said, "I thought fruit bomb meant no oak and very fruity, aggressive." Can you
Oh,
clarify what you meant
interesting.
about by fruit bomb because
Oh,
some
sure.
people
Yeah,
use
Dean,
different
I don't know
uses.
where you're from, and so maybe it's a
Yeah,
maybe
he's in
it's
London,
a
so he's in London, and
okay.
we're in
Oh,
California. So
okay. Maybe it's used a little, differently in London, but I have always heard of, fruit bomb being used to describe a really, really extracted wine, so lots of like rich fruit flavors, usually a dark color, definitely leading with the fruit, kind of like you said. And then, I mean, I guess the other part of that, with Barossa Shiraz, I would say maybe more like if we're talking about 7 to 10 years ago, was definitely, tons and tons of new American oak, kind of in that style that was very popular around that time, where a lot of wines had tons and tons of new oak. And so it wasn't just, that it was producers and the only producers in the Barossa using tons of oak on their wines and just making these huge, like, you know, power lifter, since got the Olympics going on, like these massive wines that can come out 15% alcohol, maybe 15.5% alcohol, just kind of a more is more type wine.
yeah,
At least
great.
is how I've heard fruit bomb used in the past. And so yeah, I think we're kind of on the same wavelength here, but just in general, yeah, it used to be a really, really extracted, dark, rich, heavy style of wine. And I think they've gotten a little bit lighter on their feet in recent years. So
Yeah, and Steve just added a comment. He often thinks of some Zinfandels as fruit bombs, and absolutely right, where you have that really expressive fruit, and
yeah,
I often think of fruit bombs as well, just like you, Noel, right? Coming from a region where the fruit gets very ripe, and very opulent, and oftentimes in those regions, um, they are also experimenting at the same time with heavy use of oak, right, to match that,
yeah.
to try to balance it out. But it is nice to know that a lot of regions are dialing back that style and going for more classic styles. So I think that was it for the questions to answer live. If you do have any other questions, drop them in the comments, and like I said, we'll try to answer those off air as well. We really appreciate you joining us today, Noel, and all the viewers on our Facebook page. See you back next Wednesday at 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, and we'll have another instance of trivia. That's always fun. In the meantime, stay safe and drink well. Thanks, Noel.
Thank you guys. Take care.
Cheers.